The night my parents erased me from their future, I was standing 10 feet away, holding my own coat, waiting for someone to tell me where I belonged. No one did. That's how it started. Not with shouting, not with a fight, just silence. Polite, well-dressed silence, in a room full of people who shared my last name and acted like I was furniture. My name is Nora Caldwell. I'm 31 years old. And until that night, I believed that if I stayed quiet long enough, helpful enough, small enough, my family would eventually stop treating me like a problem they hadn't figured out how to throw away. I was wrong. It was the Saturday before Thanksgiving, late November, cold enough that Manhattan smelled like wet wool and exhaust. My parents had rented out the back room of a private club near Gramercy Park to celebrate my younger brother Ethan's engagement. White tablecloths, soft jazz, a printed menu with his name centered in gold script, as if he were already married to the future. I hadn't been invited at first. That detail matters. I found out about the party 3 days before, through my Aunt Linda, who called me by accident while complaining to someone else about the seating chart. When I asked her what she meant, there was a pause long enough for me to hear her swallow. "Oh," she said, "didn't your mother tell you?" No, she hadn't. 20 minutes later, my mother texted me like she was doing me a favor. "We assumed you'd be busy, but you can come if you want. Casual attire. Don't make a fuss." That was the invitation, so I went. Because some part of me still thought showing up mattered. I arrived early, coat over my arm, hair pinned back the way my mother liked, makeup light enough not to draw comments. I stood near the entrance while servers passed with champagne flutes meant for other people. Every table had place cards. White, thick paper. Names written by a calligrapher. I walked the room twice before I realized something was missing. Mine. I checked again. Then a third time. Slower. My chest tightened. Not dramatically, just enough to be uncomfortable. Like a shoe that doesn't quite fit. When I finally asked the hostess, a young woman with a clipboard and a nervous smile, she scanned the list and frowned. "I don't see you here," she said softly. "Are you with the Caldwell party?" "Yes," I said. "I'm their daughter." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Let me check with the event coordinator." I stood there while conversations bloomed and folded around me. My parents' friends, business partners, Ethan's future in-laws, who I'd never met but somehow recognized me immediately as someone they didn't need to acknowledge. Across the room, my mother laughed too loudly at something my brother said. My father stood beside him, one hand on Ethan's shoulder, proud in a way that had never been directed at me. Ethan caught my eye, just for a second. Then he looked away. That was the moment something shifted. Not snapped, shifted. Like a picture frame knocked slightly crooked, the coordinator came back and whispered something to the hostess, who nodded and turned to me. "There's an extra chair," she said. "We can add you to table 9, near the kitchen." I thanked her. Because I always thanked people, even when they were apologizing for someone else's decisions. Table 9 was loud and crowded. Distant relatives, someone's babysitter. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap while the engagement toast began. My father took the microphone. His voice filled the room the way it always did, calm and certain. The sound of a man used to being listened to. "We're so proud of Ethan," he said. "He's always known what he wanted, always gone after it. And now he's building a life with someone just as driven, just as capable." Applause, smiles, clinking glasses. Then he said it. "As parents, it's a relief to know that at least one of our children will carry on what we've built. At least one." No one laughed. No one gasped. It landed softly, wrapped in compliments, disguised as a harmless phrase. I felt it anyway. My mother nodded beside him, lips pressed together in approval. Ethan squeezed his fiancée's hand. She beamed. I didn't look down. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I sat there and listened as my future was quietly revised without my input. That wasn't the first time my family chose Ethan over me. It wasn't even the worst. But it was the first time they did it publicly, with witnesses, with wine glasses raised, and for reasons I wouldn't understand until much later. That mattered. After the toast, my mother finally approached my table. She leaned down, kissed my cheek like we were distant acquaintances. "I'm glad you could make it," she said. "We weren't sure you'd be comfortable." "I'm fine," I said. She glanced at my empty place setting, the missing name card, the chair pulled in too close to the table. "Oh," she said lightly, "we didn't think you'd stay long." Then she smiled and walked away. I stayed, because leaving would have meant admitting I still wanted their approval. And I was already beginning to suspect that whatever love I thought I'd been earning all these years was actually permission. Conditional. Revocable. Later that night, as coats were collected and guests filtered out, I overheard my father speaking to Ethan near the bar. "You won't have to worry about your sister," he said. "She's adaptable. She'll land somewhere." Ethan didn't answer. That was the first betrayal. Quiet, neatly dressed, easily deniable. And it was the one that set everything else in motion. Because 3 days later, on Thanksgiving morning, I opened my email to find a message from my father's office with the subject line, "Trust Amendment Notification." I didn't know yet what it meant, but I knew, instinctively, that whatever was inside that document had been decided long before I was ever meant to see it. And once I read it, there would be no going back. I read the email 4 times before opening the attachment, not because I didn't understand the words, because I did, too well. I just didn't want them to settle yet. Trust Amendment Notification. That was the subject line. Neutral. Professional. The kind of language people use when they don't want to admit they're changing someone's life without asking. The sender was my father's longtime attorney, Harold Finch. He'd been part of our family orbit for as long as I could remember. Christmas cards, graduation gifts, a man who shook my hand at 16 and said, "You'll do fine, Nora," in a way that sounded reassuring but meant nothing. The PDF took a few seconds to load. When it did, I scrolled straight to the highlighted section. Lawyers always highlight the parts they know will hurt. Effective immediately, the Caldwell Family Trust has been amended to reflect revised distribution priorities. Revised distribution priorities. Like we were talking about shipping routes, not children. I skimmed, then slowed down, then stopped breathing for a moment. Ethan's share had been increased, significantly. Control of the family business, Caldwell Industrial Services, would transfer to him upon my father's retirement. The Manhattan townhouse would be placed in a separate holding entity, with occupancy rights granted to Ethan and his future spouse. And me. My name appeared once, buried near the end. Nora Caldwell shall receive a discretionary annual stipend, subject to review, contingent upon continued alignment with family values. That was it. No equity, no voting rights, no property. Just a stipend. Allowance language. The kind you give a teenager who can't be trusted with a credit card. I closed my laptop and sat very still. The radiator in my apartment clicked and hissed. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck backfired. Life continued at its usual pace, completely indifferent to the fact that my parents had just rewritten my position in the family, from adult daughter to dependent inconvenience. I wasn't surprised. That's the part that scared me. Because deep down, some version of this had always been expected. I'd grown up in the same house as Ethan, ate the same food, went to the same schools, but we were raised under different rules. Ethan was decisive. Ethan was ambitious. Ethan knew what he wanted. I was thoughtful, sensitive, not built for pressure. Those were the words my parents used when teachers praised my work but suggested I needed time. When I changed majors in college. When I chose nonprofit consulting instead of joining the family company. They never said weak. They didn't have to. At Thanksgiving dinner 2 years earlier, my aunt had asked what I was doing these days. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Nora's still figuring things out," she'd said, smiling tightly. "Ethan's already running projects. Still figuring things out." I was 29. That was how they framed it. Not as choice, as delay. As failure with better manners. I picked up my phone and scrolled to my father's number, then stopped. What would I say? "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you think I deserved to know?" He would say, "We assumed you'd be upset," or "We didn't want to burden you," or "This is for the best." Always for the best. Never for me. Instead, I called my grandmother. Her name was Ruth Caldwell. She lived in a small house in coastal Maine, the same one she and my grandfather had bought in the early 70s, before money complicated everything. She answered on the second ring. "Nora," she said, You sound quiet. I just got an email, I said. Oh? I told her, slowly, without drama. I read her the line about the stipend. There was a long pause. Then I heard her exhale. So they finally did it, she said. You knew. I suspected, she replied. Your father has been asking questions for years. About safeguards, about incentives. Incentives for what? For compliance, she said gently. That word landed hard. Compliance. I didn't think they'd do it without telling me, I said. They didn't want a discussion, Ruth said. They wanted a result. I pressed my fingers into my knee. Did I do something wrong? No, she said immediately. But you did something they don't understand. What? You didn't need them, she said. And people like your parents find that threatening. I stared at the wall. A faint water stain near the ceiling, shaped like a country I couldn't name. They think I'm unstable, I said. That's what this is. They think I can't handle responsibility. Ruth didn't answer right away. Then she said, they think control is love, and anything outside their control feels like disloyalty. After we hung up, I sat there until the light changed. By evening, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. We should talk about the trust changes. Dinner tomorrow? Talk. After the fact. When the ink was already dry. I didn't respond. That night, I slept badly. Dreams where I was standing in rooms I'd grown up in, but the doors kept moving farther away. The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. I smiled at my coworkers. I answered emails. I did my job. But something had shifted inside me. Not anger. Clarity. I started thinking back over the past few years. Small things I'd brushed off. Invitations rescinded. Decisions made without me. The way my parents spoke about me in third person when they thought I wasn't listening. They hadn't suddenly decided I wasn't capable. They'd been building a case for it. That afternoon, my father called. Nora, he said, voice warm. Did you see the email? Yes. Good, he said. Then you understand why we need to meet. Why? I asked. To explain, he said. We want you to feel secure. Secure. With a stipend, I said. He laughed lightly. It's more flexible than you think. And it ensures you're taken care of without pressure. Without power, he meant. I'm busy, I said. There was a pause. Doing what? Living my life, I said. I'll call you when I'm ready. I hung up before he could respond. That was the first time I'd ever done that. It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. Like closing a door before a draft makes you sick. That night, I opened a folder on my computer and started saving documents. Emails, old messages, notes from conversations I'd once dismissed as misunderstandings. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with them. But for the first time, I wasn't collecting memories to make sense of my pain. I was collecting evidence. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought formed, quiet but persistent. If they'd gone this far without telling me, there were probably other things they hadn't told me either. Things that would matter. And I was done being the last to know. The first thing I learned after the trust amendment was that silence makes people careless. When you stop reacting the way they expect, they start filling the quiet with their own assumptions. My parents assumed I was hurt but passive, upset but manageable. They thought I would sulk for a while, maybe complain to my grandmother, then accept the stipend and settle back into my designated corner of the family narrative. So they stopped being careful. I didn't go to dinner with my mother. I didn't return my father's calls. I didn't announce anything dramatic. I just pulled back, politely, cleanly. And in that space, the truth began to leak. It started with a voicemail from my Aunt Linda, left late on a Sunday night. Nora, sweetheart, I just wanted to check on you, she said, voice thick with wine. Your mother's been stressed. This whole trust thing, it was never meant to hurt you. It's just, well, you know how things are. I listened twice. She hadn't meant to hurt me. That phrase again, intent used as insulation. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, between us, your dad's been planning this since before Ethan proposed. He didn't want complications. Complications. I saved the voicemail. 2 days later, I ran into Marcus Hale for coffee. Marcus had been my father's junior partner years ago before leaving to start his own firm. We'd stayed loosely in touch. He knew the family dynamics well enough to read between lines. You look tired, he said after we sat down. I am, I said. You saw the trust amendment? Yes, he nodded. I wondered when that would land. You knew too. Not officially, he said. But your father asked me something last year that stuck with me. What? He stirred his coffee slowly. He wanted to know how enforceable discretionary clauses were, specifically for adult children who might challenge decisions emotionally rather than legally. Emotionally. He said that? I asked. Marcus looked at me carefully. He said he wanted to avoid a situation where feelings interfered with succession planning. Succession. Planning. Not family. Not relationships. I thanked Marcus for the coffee and went home, feeling oddly calm. That evening, I pulled out an old storage box from the back of my closet. Inside were things I'd never bothered to organize. Birthday cards, old contracts from a freelance project I'd once done for Caldwell Industrial Services, notes I'd taken after meetings I wasn't officially part of, but had been asked to sit in on because someone needed a second set of eyes. One document stopped me cold. It was a consulting memo from 4 years earlier. I'd been asked, informally, to review a potential acquisition target. Small manufacturing firm in Ohio, family-owned, struggling. I'd spent weeks analyzing their operations, identifying inefficiencies, drafting a restructuring plan. My father had praised the work at the time, said it was surprisingly thorough. The acquisition went through. The memo was stamped confidential, and at the bottom, under author, it listed my father's name. Not mine. I sat back slowly. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter, that I wasn't interested in credit, that being useful was enough. But now, with the trust amendment still burning behind my eyes, it felt different. I searched my email, found 3 more instances. My work, my analysis, my words, all circulated under someone else's authority. I wasn't excluded because I lacked capability. I was excluded because I threatened the hierarchy. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me focused. The next morning, I called an attorney. Her name was Evelyn Shore. Mid-40s, sharp voice, no small talk. I don't want to sue my parents, I said. I want to understand my position. Those are not mutually exclusive, she replied. But start talking. I laid it out. The trust, the stipend, the discretionary language, the work I'd done for the family company without recognition or compensation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Your parents are treating you like a liability they need to manage." Yes, and they've done so in writing. Yes, she paused. Do you know who originally funded the trust? My grandfather, I said, with contributions from my grandmother before she passed. Good, Evelyn said, because discretionary trusts can be challenged if they're being used punitively rather than protectively, especially when there's evidence of bad faith. I closed my eyes. Bad faith like deliberately limiting information? Or misattributing work? Like rewriting history, she said. For the first time since the engagement party, I felt something close to control. Evelyn asked me to send everything. Emails, memos, voicemails. I did. 2 days later, she called me back. There's more here than you realize, she said. What do you mean? I did some digging, she said. Your parents recently restructured part of the company, quietly, shifted assets into a holding LLC. And they did it 2 weeks before amending the trust, she said, which means they anticipated pushback. My grip tightened on the phone. From me, from you, she confirmed. That night, I drove out to see my grandmother, Ruth. She poured tea and listened while I explained everything I'd learned. She didn't look surprised. I wondered how long they'd try to keep you small, she said. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Because they wanted you to doubt yourself, she said gently. And I wanted you to choose your response, not react to theirs. I stared at my hands. They think I won't fight. Ruth smiled faintly. They think you don't know how. We sat in silence for a while. The ocean wind rattled the windows. Then she stood and walked to a small desk in the corner, opened a drawer, pulled out a manila envelope. I was going to wait, she said. But you're ready. She placed it in front of me. Inside were copies of trust documents I'd never seen. Earlier versions. Notes in my grandfather's handwriting. Clauses about equal participation. Shared decision-making. Protections that had been quietly removed over the years. They started changing things after he died, Ruth said. Bit by bit. Always with a reason. I swallowed. Why give this to me now? Because they've crossed a line, she said. And because the only thing that scares people who control narratives is someone who knows the whole story. I drove home that night with the envelope on the passenger seat. For years, I thought my role in the family was to absorb discomfort quietly, to smooth things over, to adapt. But adaptation had only taught them that they could take without consequence. I wasn't interested in confrontation or revenge for its own sake. What I wanted was simple. I wanted my choices back. And for the first time, I knew exactly where to start. Because the next move wouldn't be emotional. It would be legal. And once it was made, nothing in my family would ever be quiet again. I didn't confront my parents right away. That restraint wasn't generosity. It was strategy. People like my father mistook silence for surrender. The longer I stayed quiet, the more comfortable he became. And comfort breeds mistakes. 2 weeks passed after Thanksgiving. I declined invitations, missed calls. I let my mother leave increasingly anxious voicemails that started with concern and ended with irritation. "Nora, this distance isn't healthy," she said in one. "We need to talk like adults." Adults. That word again. Always used when I was expected to listen. Never when I was expected to decide. During that time, Evelyn Shore and I worked quietly. She reviewed every document my grandmother had given me, cross-referenced them with the current trust filings, and flagged inconsistencies. There were more than I expected. "The issue isn't just favoritism," she told me during one meeting. "It's pattern. A long one." She spread papers across the conference table. Old amendments, revisions, notes in the margins. "Your father systematically removed protective clauses," she continued. "Not illegally, carefully. Each change defensible on its own, but together," she tapped the stack, "it tells a story." "What story?" I asked. "That you were intentionally excluded," she said. "Not because you were incapable, but because you were inconvenient." Inconvenient people ask questions. They don't fit cleanly into succession plans. I left her office that afternoon and walked 3 blocks without noticing where I was going. The city hummed around me, office workers rushing, delivery bikes swerving, everyone moving with purpose. I'd spent years assuming I lacked direction. Now I realized I'd simply never been allowed to choose one. That evening, I received an email from my father. Subject: "Let's resolve this." Short, direct. The kind of message meant to signal authority. "Nora, your mother and I are concerned about your withdrawal. This situation has been misunderstood. We need to meet and clear the air. Please come to the house Sunday afternoon. This doesn't need to become adversarial." Adversarial. I stared at the word for a long time. He already saw me as opposition. I replied with one sentence: "Sunday works. Please have your attorney present." The response came 5 minutes later. "Why would that be necessary?" I didn't answer. Sunday afternoon, I walked up the steps of the townhouse I'd grown up in. The front door opened before I rang the bell. My mother looked relieved and irritated at the same time. "You didn't have to bring lawyers into this," she said as I stepped inside. "I didn't," I replied. Yet. My father was already in the living room, seated stiffly, hands clasped. No attorney in sight. "We assumed this was a family conversation," he said. "It is," I said, which is why I asked for transparency. He gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. My mother spoke first. "Nora, sweetheart, this trust decision wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting everyone involved." "From what?" I asked. She hesitated. "Uncertainty." "You mean me?" I said. My father exhaled sharply. "You're being dramatic." I nodded slowly. "Then, explain the stipend language." He frowned. "What about it?" "Explain why my financial security is contingent on alignment with family values," I said, "and define those values." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father leaned back. "We didn't want you making decisions that could harm yourself." "Like what?" I asked. "Like instability," he said. "Like litigation. Like resentment." "So instead," I said, "you decided for me." "You've always struggled with long-term planning," he said. "This gives you stability without pressure." "That's not stability," I said. "That's control." The room went quiet. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the coffee table. "I'd like to talk about these," I said. My father didn't touch it. "What are they?" "Documents," I said. "My work. Your name." My mother's face tightened. "This again?" "I didn't say anything at the time," I said, because I believed contribution mattered more than credit. But now that my competence is being used as justification for exclusion, It's relevant. My father flipped open the folder, scanned the first page, then the second. That was collaborative, he said quickly. You assisted. I authored it, I said. You submitted it. He closed the folder. This isn't what you think. Then explain it, I said. He didn't. Instead, he stood. I won't be interrogated in my own home, he said. If you're unhappy, we can revisit the stipend terms. Increase them. Add flexibility. I don't want an allowance, I said. I want agency. My mother stood too. You're overreacting. Ethan's role is different. Because he's male? I asked quietly. That's not fair, she snapped. No, I said. It's accurate. My father's jaw tightened. This conversation is going nowhere. Then we're done, I said. I turned toward the door. Nora, my mother called. If you walk out now, you're choosing conflict. I paused, hand on the doorknob. No, I said. I'm choosing clarity. I left. That night, Evelyn called. They contacted me, she said. Your father's attorney. He wants to discuss a settlement. A settlement for what? I asked. For potential claims, she said. He didn't specify. I smiled for the first time in weeks. He's nervous, I said. He should be, Evelyn replied. Because once we file a formal request for disclosure, things get very public very fast. The next morning, I authorized her to proceed. We filed a demand letter requesting a full accounting of the trust modifications and asset transfers over the last 10 years. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, but it was enough. By evening, my phone lit up with missed calls. My father, my mother, Ethan. I didn't answer any of them. Because for the first time, they weren't deciding when the conversation happened. I was, and the next step wouldn't be about talking. It would be about leverage, which, as it turned out, they'd handed me themselves without realizing it. And once I pulled on that thread, the entire structure they'd built would start to unravel. Leverage doesn't announce itself. It hides in paperwork, in timing, in the small assumptions people make when they believe they're untouchable. The accounting request did exactly what Evelyn said it would. It forced movement. Within 48 hours, my father's attorney sent a response. Polite, measured, full of phrases like, in the interest of transparency, and to avoid unnecessary escalation. But buried in the attachments was something they didn't mean to show me. A transfer log. It wasn't dramatic at first glance. Just dates, entities, dollar amounts, the kind of document most people skim without thinking. But I didn't skim. I'd spent years reading financials from the margins, watching how money moved instead of where it landed. And something was off. 3 months before Ethan's engagement, Caldwell Industrial Services had transferred a significant portion of its liquid reserves into a newly formed LLC, Northline Strategic Holdings. No announcement, no internal memo, just a quiet shift. I called Evelyn immediately. They moved cash before the trust amendment, I said. Why? She was already looking at the same page. Because liquid assets are easier to reclassify, she said, and harder to trace once they're inside layered entities. To protect Ethan, I said. To protect control, she corrected. Same goal, different framing. I leaned back in my chair. Is it legal? Yes, she said. Barely. And only if it was disclosed properly. And if it wasn't? She didn't answer right away. Then it's a problem. 2 days later, my brother called. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. Nora, Ethan said. His voice was tight, rehearsed. What's going on? What do you mean? I asked. Dad's saying you're threatening legal action, he said. That you're trying to destabilize things. I requested documents, I said. That's not a threat. You hired a lawyer, he said. So did Dad, I replied. He sighed. This didn't have to get so serious. It got serious when my future was decided without me, I said. There was a pause. You know they're just trying to do what's best, he said finally. For who? I asked. For everyone, he said. No, I said. For you. Silence. I didn't ask for this, Ethan said quietly. No, I agreed. You didn't, but you accepted it. That's not fair, he snapped. I worked for what I have. I know, I said. That's why this hurts. You never had to work against them. I did. He exhaled sharply. What do you want? I thought about that for a moment. I want the truth, I said, and I want it documented. That's vague, he said. Get used to it, I replied. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. I didn't hate my brother. That was the strange part. I resented the ease with which he'd been lifted forward. But he'd been shaped by the same system that had flattened me. He'd just learned how to stand where the light was. Later that week, Evelyn called with a change in tone. "They made a mistake," she said. "What kind?" "The kind that happens when people assume family won't push back," she replied. She explained slowly. "When my father restructured the assets into Northline Strategic Holdings, he'd done it under the assumption that the trust amendment would go unchallenged, that I wouldn't demand disclosure, that I wouldn't have independent counsel reviewing timelines. But there was a clause, an old one, buried in my grandfather's original trust language, preserved through decades of amendments because no one thought it mattered anymore. Any material asset transfer made within 6 months of a trust modification had to be reviewed by all beneficiaries. All beneficiaries, including me. "They didn't notify you," Evelyn said, "which means the transfer can be contested." I closed my eyes. "So what happens now?" "Now," she said, "we ask questions they don't want to answer." The formal inquiry went out the next morning. By afternoon, my mother showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I opened the door and saw her standing there, coat still on, eyes rimmed red. "You're tearing this family apart," she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She paced my living room like it was foreign territory, which, in a way, it was. She'd never liked that I lived here. Too small, too far from them. "You don't understand what this is doing to your father," she said. "He hasn't slept." "That makes 2 of us," I said. "This isn't about money," she insisted. "It's about trust." I nodded. "Exactly." She stopped pacing. "You're punishing us." "I'm asking for accountability," I said. "There's a difference." She looked at me then. Really looked. As if she were seeing me not as a daughter, but as a problem she couldn't solve with reassurance. "If you keep pushing," she said, voice shaking, "you're going to lose everything." I met her gaze. I already did. I'm just documenting it now. She left without saying goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I doubted myself, because I could see where this was heading. The inquiry would force disclosures. Disclosures would raise questions. Questions would reach the board. And once that happened, my father wouldn't just be dealing with me. He'd be dealing with scrutiny. The kind that doesn't care about family dynamics or intent. The kind that only cares about facts. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, thinking about something my grandmother had once told me. "Power isn't loud," she'd said. "It's patient." I was done being patient for other people. Now, I was being patient for myself. And in a few days, when the first response deadline hit, I knew something important would surface. Not an apology, not a confession, but proof. The kind that changes everything. The deadline landed on a Wednesday. I remember because it was raining. The kind of cold, steady rain that makes the city feel smaller, quieter, like everything is happening behind glass. By noon, Evelyn still hadn't heard back. "That's not good for them," she said when I called. "Silence past deadline usually means they're scrambling." "At what point do we escalate?" I asked. "We don't," she said. "Not yet. We wait." Waiting used to feel like weakness to me. Something I'd done my whole life while other people made decisions. But this was different. This waiting had direction. At 3:47 p.m., Evelyn forwarded me an email from my father's attorney. They were requesting an extension. 7 days. I read it twice. Then once more, slowly. "They need time," I said. "They need cover," Evelyn replied. "Time to reconstruct a narrative that explains the transfer without admitting intent." "Do we grant it?" "Yes," she said. "On our terms." She drafted a response, granting a 48-hour extension, contingent on full disclosure of all Northline Strategic Holdings transactions and internal communications related to the trust amendment. When the reply went out, my phone rang almost immediately. It was Ethan again. "Dad says you're trying to force him into a corner," he said without preamble. "I'm asking questions," I said. "He's choosing not to answer them." "This is going to get ugly," Ethan said. "It already is," I replied. "You just haven't been on this side before." He was quiet for a moment. "You know Mom's been crying nonstop," he said. "I know," I said. "She cried when she forgot my birthday last year, too. That didn't change anything." "That's not fair," he said weakly. "No," I said. "It's accurate." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the rain sliding down the window. I wasn't enjoying this. That surprised me. I'd expected some sense of triumph by now, satisfaction, vindication. Instead, what I felt was distance. Like I'd stepped out of a role I'd been playing for so long that I'd forgotten there was a world beyond it. That evening, something unexpected happened. I got an email from someone I didn't recognize. Subject: Caldwell Trust Inquiry. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Miss Caldwell? My name is Janet Morales. I sit on the advisory board for Caldwell Industrial Services. Your name has come up in recent discussions. If you're willing, I'd appreciate the opportunity to speak with you privately. No mention of my father. No mention of conflict. Just interest. I forwarded it to Evelyn. Her response came back almost immediately. This is important, she wrote. Say yes. And listen more than you talk. We spoke the next morning. Janet Morales was in her early 60s. Sharp-eyed, direct. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. I'll be honest, she said. Your father has always been difficult. I blinked. He has? She laughed softly. He's controlled information for years. Not illegal, just selective. And the board? I asked. They see what he shows them, she said. Until recently. Recently? I echoed. The trust amendment raised eyebrows, she said. Not because of favoritism, that's common, but because of timing. My heart thudded. What timing? She paused. The asset transfer. So the board knew. Why contact me? I asked. Because you were excluded, she said simply. And exclusions create blind spots. Blind spots are risk. I exhaled slowly. What do you want from me? I asked. Context, she said. And honesty. So I gave it to her. Not emotionally. Factually. I told her about my work. The memos. The lack of credit. The stipend language. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Your father framed this as protection, she said, but it looks like consolidation. That's what it feels like, I said. She nodded. I won't lie to you. This may escalate beyond family. I know, I said. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my mother's tears, my brother's frustration, the townhouse I was no longer welcome in. Yes, I said. I am. After we hung up, I realized something important. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about governance. And once governance is questioned, control shifts fast. That afternoon, Evelyn called with urgency in her voice. They responded, she said. And Nora, you were right. About what? They disclosed internal emails, she said, including one from your father to his attorney. My pulse spiked. What does it say? She read it aloud. Once the amendment is finalized, Nora's leverage will be minimal. Ensure Northline remains outside her visibility. I closed my eyes. Minimal leverage. Outside her visibility. He planned this, I said. Yes, Evelyn said. And now we have it in writing. What does that mean? I asked. It means bad faith, she said. Clear intent to exclude a beneficiary to avoid scrutiny. I felt something settle in my chest. Not rage. Resolve. So what's the next move? I asked. Evelyn didn't hesitate. We file a formal petition, she said. Not just for disclosure. For review. By whom? The court, she said. And once that happens, the board will have to respond. I leaned back in my chair. Court. Board. Public record. This was no longer a private family matter. Do it, I said. That night, I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't because of fear. It was because I finally understood something that had eluded me my entire life. My parents hadn't underestimated me. They'd calculated me. And for the first time, their calculation was wrong. Because they'd assumed I would fold under pressure. Instead, I'd stepped out of the role they assigned me. And once you do that, you can't be put back. The petition was filed the next morning. And by the end of the week, the first real consequence would hit. Not for me. For my father. And when it did, the silence he'd relied on for years would turn against him loudly. The first headline didn't mention my name. That was intentional. Caldwell Industrial Services faces internal review following trust dispute. No drama, no scandal language. Just enough to make people read twice. I saw it Tuesday morning while waiting for coffee. Someone at the counter was scrolling on their phone, frowned, then looked up at the television mounted above the espresso machine. I didn't react. I paid, took my cup, and walked outside like nothing had changed. But everything had. By noon, Evelyn called. The board convened an emergency session, she said. Without your father. I stopped walking. Without him? He was asked to submit a written statement instead, she said. That's not standard. My chest tightened. Not with panic, with recognition. That's what loss of control looks like. Not chaos. Procedure. What about Northline? I asked. They want explanations, she said. Detailed ones. That afternoon, my father finally left a voicemail. Not angry, not pleading, controlled. Nora, he said, voice steady, this has gone further than you realize. We need to stop this before it causes irreversible damage. He paused, then added, for everyone's sake, never mine. I didn't call back. Instead, I received another message. This one from Janet Morales. Board meeting tomorrow. Closed session. Your presence has been requested. Requested, not invited. I forwarded it to Evelyn. She replied with one sentence. They can't ignore you anymore. The meeting took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of a building I'd passed dozens of times without entering. I arrived early, portfolio in hand, posture neutral. No power suit, no performance. Just facts. Janet greeted me first. 2 other board members followed. Men in their 60s, polite, guarded. They looked at me the way people do when they're reassessing someone they'd misjudged. We appreciate you coming, one of them said. I appreciate being asked, I replied. They didn't smile. The chair cleared his throat. We need clarity. I nodded. So do I. They asked questions about the trust, about my role in the company, about the memos, about Northline. I answered calmly. I didn't speculate. I didn't accuse. I let the documents speak. At one point, the chair asked, why didn't you come to us earlier? I met his gaze. Because until recently, I didn't realize I'd been excluded on purpose. That landed harder than I expected. Janet leaned forward. If the trust amendment is overturned, she said, what do you want? The question hung in the air. I'd thought about this, carefully. I don't want my brother's position, I said. And I don't want revenge. Several eyebrows lifted. I want governance that reflects reality, I continued. And I want my involvement to be transparent, defined, not discretionary. Silence. Finally, the chair nodded slowly. Understood. I left the building knowing one thing for certain. My father's version of events was no longer the only one in the room. That evening, my mother showed up again. This time, she didn't knock. I opened the door to find her standing there, hands shaking, eyes wild with something close to panic. They're saying your father may have to step down, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. She collapsed onto the couch. This is bigger than you, she whispered. It always was, I said. She looked up at me. Why are you doing this? I sat across from her. Because you taught me to be responsible. And responsibility means responding when something's wrong. She laughed weakly. You're punishing him. No, I said. I'm correcting the record. She shook her head. You don't understand what this will cost. I thought about the stipend, the erased name card, the trust amendment written without me. I understand exactly what it costs, I said. I've been paying it for years. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it, then at me. It's Ethan, she said. Then answer, I said. She did. I didn't hear everything, but I heard enough. He's saying the board's freezing certain decisions. No, I don't know. Yes, I'm with her now. She hung up slowly. He's scared, she said. So was I replied. For a long time. She stood, smoothing her coat like armor. If this destroys your father. I didn't destroy him, I said. I stopped covering for him. She stared at me, as if trying to reconcile 2 images that no longer matched. Then she left. 2 days later, the second headline dropped. Caldwell Board reviews leadership amid governance concerns. This time, my father's name was mentioned. Not accused. Not condemned. Weeb. That word did more damage than any accusation ever could. Evelyn called that night. They're negotiating, she said. Quietly. With whom? I asked. With us, she said. And with your father. Separately. I closed my eyes. Separate negotiations meant fractured authority. What are they offering? I asked. A formal role, she said. Equity, voting rights, clear scope. And Dad? They haven't told him yet, she said. But he won't retain unilateral control. I felt something release in my chest. Not joy. relief, because the moment of maximum tension had passed. Now came the fallout. And fallout doesn't explode. It settles. Slowly. Unevenly. The final board meeting was scheduled for Friday. I knew that whatever happened, there would change my family forever. But as I sat alone that night, city lights flickering outside my window, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid of losing them anymore. I was afraid of losing myself again. And that wasn't a risk I was willing to take. Not now. Not ever. The Friday board meeting started without my father. That alone told me everything. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the lobby, hands folded around a paper cup of water I didn't drink. I wasn't nervous. My body was calm in a way it had never been around my family. I wasn't there to be judged. I was there to be acknowledged. Janet Morales came down to get me, herself. "He's upstairs," she said quietly as we walked to the elevator. "But not in the room." "Does he know?" I asked. She nodded. "He was informed this morning." The elevator ride was silent. When the doors opened, the boardroom was already half full. 12 seats around a long table. Legal counsel at one end. 2 empty chairs near the head. One of them was my father's. I took a seat halfway down, not claiming territory, not shrinking either. The chair called the meeting to order. "This session concerns governance, fiduciary responsibility, and succession," he said. "We will proceed accordingly." Proceed accordingly. No theatrics, no raised voices. That was the real punishment. They reviewed the findings. The trust amendment. The timing of the asset transfer. The internal email. When the email was read aloud, no one looked at me. They all looked at the table. Minimal leverage, outside her visibility. It sounded worse in a room full of people trained to hear intent. The chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Caldwell has submitted a written response." He summarized it. My father claimed the actions were protective, not punitive. That he believed I was vulnerable to stress. That Northline was created to streamline operations. No one interrupted. Then Janet spoke. "I'd like to hear from Ms. Caldwell," she said. Briefly, I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend my character. I didn't talk about childhood or birthdays or place cards. "I want to be very clear," I said. "I'm not here because I want what my brother has. I'm here because decisions were made about me without me, and then justified using my supposed limitations." I paused. "That's not protection. That's exclusion." Silence. "I'm not asking this board to punish anyone," I continued. "I'm asking you to recognize a pattern that creates risk. For the company, for the trust, for the people who depend on both." I sat down. The chair nodded once. "Thank you." They asked me to step out while they deliberated. I waited in a small conference room down the hall. The walls were glass, but the view faced another building. I couldn't see inside. I didn't try to listen. For the first time, the outcome didn't feel like something I needed to control. I'd done what I came to do. After 40 minutes, Janet came to get me. "They've reached a decision," she said. Back in the room, the chair spoke carefully. "Effective immediately. The board is instituting an interim governance structure," he said. "Mr. Caldwell will remain in an advisory capacity only. Operational authority will be distributed among senior leadership, pending further review." Advisory only. My father had built his identity on command. This was a quiet removal. The chair continued. "As for the trust," he said, "the amendment is under review. Pending that outcome, Ms. Caldwell will be granted full beneficiary visibility and participatory rights." Participatory, not discretionary. "We are also extending a formal offer to Ms. Caldwell," he said, turning to me. "A defined role in strategic oversight, effective immediately." I nodded. "Thank you." There was no applause, no congratulations, just process. When I left the building, my phone buzzed. It was my father. I didn't answer. He sent a text instead. "You didn't have to do this." I stared at the screen. Then I typed back. "I didn't do this to you. I stopped letting it be done to me." I put the phone away. That evening, Ethan called again. "I just heard," he said. His voice was low. "Dad's not okay." "I know," I said. "You blindsided him," he said. "He blindsided me first," I replied. He was quiet. "I didn't think it would go this far," he admitted. "I did," I said. "That's why I didn't stop." He exhaled. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," I said. and on whether you want a relationship that's real or one that's convenient. Another pause. I don't know how to be in the middle anymore, he said. Neither do I said. So maybe stop trying. We hung up without resolution. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about the word family. How often it's used as a reason to tolerate what you'd never accept from anyone else. How easily it becomes a leash. I wasn't cutting them off. Not yet. But I was cutting the cord that tied my worth to their approval. On Sunday morning, I went for a long walk. No phone, no music. I passed families going to brunch, couples arguing quietly, parents tugging children along. Life, unedited. By the time I got home, I knew the next phase wouldn't be loud. It would be subtle, legal, permanent. The trust review would take months. The governance changes would ripple slowly. And somewhere in that process, my father would have to face something he'd avoided his entire life. A world where I existed without his permission. And that, more than any headline or board decision, was the real shift. Because once that happens, the old rules stop applying, and there's no going back. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces. Emails that stopped including my father. Meetings scheduled without his input. Decisions made by committees instead of command. From the outside, Caldwell Industrial Services looked stable, calm, business as usual. Inside, everything had shifted. I was brought in slowly, deliberately, not as a figurehead, not as a replacement, as an observer with teeth. My title was Strategic Oversight Liaison, vague enough to avoid panic, specific enough to grant access. On my first day in the role, I sat in on a senior leadership meeting where my father used to sit at the head of the table. His chair was still there, empty. No one mentioned him. They discussed supply chain risks, labor issues, a potential acquisition in Arizona. I listened more than I spoke. Halfway through, someone referenced a cost-saving initiative that sounded familiar. That won't work long-term, I said quietly. The room went still. I felt the weight of eyes, measured. Curious. Why? The COO asked. I explained. Not emotionally, structurally. Where the assumptions broke down. Where the margins would erode. When I finished, he nodded slowly. That's helpful. Helpful. Not surprising. Not impressive. Just useful. After the meeting, Janet pulled me aside. You see the system, she said. Your father saw outcomes. You see consequences. I thought about that later. Walking home through streets lit with early winter light, consequences had always been my domain. I'd lived in them while other people made choices. That week, the trust review officially began. Court filings, timelines, requests for testimony. Evelyn warned me it would get uncomfortable. They'll try to reframe you, she said, as unstable, emotional, unreliable. Let them, I said. I have a paper trail. My father's attorney reached out again. This time, not to negotiate, but to warn. These proceedings can become very public, Nora. Once that happens, there's no controlling the narrative. I didn't respond, because I wasn't trying to control the narrative. I was letting it exist. My mother stopped calling. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed her voice, because it confirmed what I'd always suspected. When I stopped being manageable, I stopped being useful to her. Ethan tried, in his way. We met for coffee near his office. He looked tired, older. I didn't know how deep it went, he said after we sat down. The emails, the planning. I believe you, I said. He looked relieved. Dad keeps saying you betrayed him. I stirred my coffee. He betrayed the truth. Ethan winced. He says you always wanted this. Control. I laughed once. I wanted inclusion. That's not how he sees it, Ethan said. I know, I replied. That's why we're here. He stared into his cup. What happens if the trust amendment is overturned? Then it reverts, I said, to equal distribution, shared oversight. And if it isn't, then at least it was reviewed, I said, and the record will reflect intent. He nodded slowly. You're not backing down. No, I said. I'm standing still. He's the one who keeps pushing. That afternoon, I was asked to review historical governance decisions, old minutes, archived resolutions. It was tedious work. Quiet and revealing. Patterns emerged. Not just exclusion of me, consolidation everywhere. voices minimized, dissent softened or removed. This wasn't personal, it was habitual. My father hadn't targeted me because I was weak. He'd sidelined me because I wouldn't play the role he needed. That realization drained the last of my anger. Anger implies surprise. I wasn't surprised anymore. 2 weeks later, the court scheduled preliminary hearings. My name appeared in a public docket. That's when the messages started. Cousins, old family friends, people who hadn't spoken to me in years, suddenly checking in. I answered none of them. Not because I was bitter, because this wasn't a group discussion. One evening, as I was reviewing notes at home, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Nora, my father's voice said when I answered. It sounded different, quieter, stripped of certainty. I need to talk to you, he said. I closed my eyes. About what? About ending this, he said. Before it goes any further. You had that chance, I said. I made mistakes, he said quickly, but we can fix them, privately. By what? I asked. Restoring my stipend? No, he said. By revising the amendment, giving you more. More what? I asked. More security, he said. There it was again. Security without power. I don't want to negotiate my dignity, I said. Silence. You're destroying everything I built, he said finally. I felt something tighten, then release. No, I said. I'm showing people how it was built. I hung up. That night, I didn't cry. I sat on my couch and watched the city lights flicker on and off. Thought about the years I'd spent trying to be smaller, so other people could feel larger. That chapter was over. The hearings would be messy, the outcome uncertain. But something fundamental had already changed. I was no longer reacting to my family's decisions. I was making my own. And whether the trust reverted or not, whether my father accepted it or not, one thing was irreversible. The power to define me was no longer theirs. It was mine. And that was something no amendment could ever undo. The first hearing wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no gasps, just a courtroom that smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant, and a judge who looked at the case the way surgeons look at scans. Calm, precise, interested. I sat behind Evelyn at the petitioner's table. My father sat across the aisle with his attorney, shoulders squared, jaw set. He didn't look at me. That was new. For most of my life, even his indifference had been performative. This wasn't. This was avoidance. The judge opened with procedure, jurisdiction, scope, timeline. Then Evelyn spoke. She didn't tell my story. She didn't need to. She laid out facts like stepping stones. The trust's original intent, the amendments, the asset transfer, the internal communications demonstrating deliberate exclusion of a beneficiary. When she quoted the email about minimal leverage, my father's attorney shifted in his seat. The judge asked one question. Mr. Caldwell, she said, looking over her glasses, why was the beneficiary not notified of the asset transfer within the required window? My father's attorney stood. Your Honor, the transfer was operational, not material. The judge tilted her head. 17% of liquid reserves is not material. Silence. The judge nodded once, slowly. I see. That was it. No ruling, no conclusion. But the tone had changed. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Not many. 2 cameras, 1 notepad. Evelyn guided me past them without comment. My father didn't follow. He left through a side door. That afternoon, the board sent out an internal memo. Effective immediately, all major financial decisions require multi-signatory approval. Translated, no more unilateral control. I read it 3 times. Then once more, just to feel it settle. My phone buzzed with a message from Janet. You handled yourself well today. This will accelerate things. Accelerate what? I wondered. The unraveling. The next few weeks were heavy. Depositions scheduled, documents requested. Long days followed by longer nights. My mother finally reached out. Not with anger, with exhaustion. I don't recognize him anymore, she said over the phone. Your father, he's bitter. I said nothing. He blames you, she added quietly. I know, I said. She hesitated. Do you blame him? I thought about that. No, I said. I blame the system he chose to protect. She didn't respond. 2 days later, Ethan called from his office, voice low. "They're asking me to testify," he said. "I know," I replied. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said. "You don't have to," I said. "Just tell the truth." "That will hurt him," Ethan said. "It already has," I said gently. "Lying won't fix it." When Ethan testified, I wasn't in the room, but I read the transcript later. He'd been careful, honest. He admitted he knew about the trust amendment before I did, that he hadn't asked questions, that he'd assumed it was fair. That assumption was noted. After that, things moved faster. The judge issued a preliminary finding. The asset transfer would be temporarily frozen pending review. The trust amendment would remain under scrutiny. Additional hearings scheduled. Northline Strategic Holdings became a liability instead of a shield. That was the moment my father stopped calling. Not because he'd given up, because he'd lost the illusion that he could still steer the outcome. One evening, I came home to find a package at my door. No return address. Inside was a single object, a framed photograph. My family, years ago. A holiday I barely remembered. My father's arm around Ethan. My mother smiling at the camera. And me, standing just slightly apart, hands folded. Smiling because I'd been told to. On the back, in my father's handwriting, was a single sentence. I did what I thought was right. I stared at it for a long time. Then I set it down, face down, on the table. Intent doesn't undo impact. And impact was finally being acknowledged. At work, my role expanded. I was asked to weigh in on restructuring proposals, long-term governance, ethics policies. One afternoon, the COO stopped by my office. "You're changing how people think," he said. "I'm not trying to," I replied. "You are," he said, "by existing." That stayed with me. Because for the first time, my presence wasn't something to manage or minimize. It was part of the structure. The final hearing was scheduled for early spring. Everything would hinge on it. But as winter faded and the city softened, I realized something important. Whatever the outcome, I was no longer waiting for permission. Not from a judge, not from a board, not from my family. The trust could revert. Or not. The inheritance could shift. Or not. But the central truth had already been established in public record. I had been excluded, deliberately, and I had responded not with collapse, but with clarity. That was the moment the story stopped being about revenge and started being about consequence, the kind that lasts. And in the final hearing, when the judge would finally decide, the question wouldn't be whether I deserved a seat at the table. It would be why anyone thought they could take it from me in the first place. By the time spring arrived, everyone was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The deeper kind. The exhaustion that comes from pretending something isn't happening while it's actively dismantling the life you built around it. The final hearing was set for April 9th. 3 days before, my father finally asked to meet me. Not through lawyers, not through my mother. Directly. He sent a short email. "Coffee. Just us. No attorneys. I need to say something before Friday." I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to refuse. Not out of fear, but out of self-preservation. I'd spent months reclaiming control. I didn't owe him emotional access just because he'd run out of leverage. But another part of me understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about fixing the relationship. It was about closing a door properly. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe on the Upper West Side, the kind of place with soft lighting and no music. Neutral territory. No memories attached. He was already there when I arrived, older than I remembered. Not physically, exactly. Structurally. Like something inside him had collapsed and his posture hadn't caught up yet. "Nora," he said, standing halfway, unsure. "Dad," I replied, sitting down. We ordered coffee, black for both of us. That hadn't changed. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he did something unexpected. "I read the filings," he said. "All of them." I nodded. "You didn't exaggerate," he continued. "You didn't twist anything." I waited. "I convinced myself you were fragile," he said. "That you needed protection. You needed compliance," I said calmly. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. "I was afraid," he said quietly. "Not of you failing. Of you seeing me clearly." That landed heavier than anything he'd said before. "You built everything around control," I said, "including us." He looked down at his hands. I thought if I kept things orderly, no one would get hurt. I thought of the stipend, the erased place card, the years of being managed instead of trusted. People still get hurt, I said. They just don't get a voice. He nodded once. I won't win on Friday, he said. That surprised me. Not because it wasn't true, but because he said it without bitterness. The judge sees it, he continued. The board sees it. Even your brother sees it now. I said nothing. I'm not asking you to stop, he said. I'm asking you to understand. Understand what? I asked. That I didn't know how to let go, he said. And when you didn't need me, I tried to make sure you couldn't leave. The honesty was unsettling. Too late. But real. I don't hate you, I said after a moment. But I don't owe you absolution either. He swallowed. I know. We finished our coffee in silence. When we stood to leave, he paused. If the trust reverts, he said, what will you do? I'll do what I've always done, I replied. Make decisions based on reality, not fear. He nodded. That's what scares me most. We walked out separately. I didn't feel lighter. I felt finished. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. I kept replaying moments from the past year, seeing them differently now that the fog had lifted. I wasn't mourning what I'd lost. I was mourning what I'd been taught to accept. The hearing itself was brief, the judge summarized, asked a few clarifying questions, reviewed the timeline one last time. Then she said she would issue her ruling within 48 hours. No drama, no speeches, just finality deferred. That afternoon, I went back to work, sat in meetings, reviewed documents, acted like someone whose future wasn't suspended between two possible outcomes. Because in a way, it wasn't. At 6:12 p.m. the next day, my phone buzzed. Evelyn. It's in, she said. I closed my eyes. And? The trust amendment has been partially overturned, she said. The court found bad faith. My chest tightened. Effective immediately, she continued. The trust reverts to shared beneficiary status. Equal visibility, equal participation. No discretionary stipulations. I exhaled slowly. And Northline? Dissolved back into the parent entity, she said. With oversight. I leaned against the kitchen counter. So it's done, I said. Almost, Evelyn replied. There's one more thing. What? The judge included a recommendation, she said. Not binding, but pointed. I waited. She suggested the board formally reassess executive leadership, Evelyn said. Given the breach of fiduciary duty. My heart thudded once. Hard. It means your father's position is no longer just weakened, she said. It's untenable. I didn't say anything, because this was the moment I'd been preparing for without naming it. The power to respond. Not emotionally, but deliberately. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. This time, I wouldn't be asked to wait outside. This time, I would walk in knowing that whatever happened next wouldn't be decided by loyalty, fear, or family hierarchy. It would be decided by facts. And when the vote was called, when the last illusion finally broke, the question wouldn't be whether my father would fall. It would be whether I would reach for power the way he had, or choose something else entirely. And that choice would define everything that came after. The board meeting on Monday morning felt different from every other one before it. Not tense. Settled. Like a decision that had already been made. And the meeting was just the formal way of acknowledging it. I arrived early and took my seat without hesitation. No one questioned it. No one glanced at the empty chair at the head of the table. My father wasn't there. He'd been informed of the agenda. He'd been given the option to attend. He declined. That, more than anything else, told me he understood how this would end. The chair opened the meeting with a summary of the court's ruling. Calm, methodical, no editorializing. Then he moved to the final item. Given the court's findings, he said, and the recommendation regarding fiduciary responsibility, we need to address executive leadership. He looked around the table. This is not personal, he continued. It's structural. I almost smiled. For decades, everything my father had done had been personal while pretending to be structural. Now the structure was speaking back. A motion was introduced. Vote of no confidence in Thomas Caldwell as Chief Executive Officer. Seconded. The chair looked at the table. Discussion. There was a pause. Then Janet Morales spoke. Thomas Caldwell built a successful company, she said. But leadership is not just about growth. It's about stewardship, and stewardship requires trust. No one argued. The vote was taken. It wasn't close. When the chair announced the result, there was no celebration, no relief, just quiet acknowledgement. Effective immediately, he said. Mr. Caldwell is relieved of executive authority. An interim CEO will be appointed. He looked at me. And Miss Caldwell, as equal beneficiary and current strategic oversight liaison, we'd like to offer you a choice. A choice. That word still felt unfamiliar. You may step into an expanded leadership role, he said, or you may remain in an advisory capacity while we restructure. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment people always imagine when they talk about revenge. The triumph, the taking of the throne. But standing there, I felt none of that. What I felt was clarity. I'm not interested in being CEO, I said. A few people blinked. I'm interested in building systems that don't depend on one person's control, I continued, including mine. I paused. I'll remain in my current role, I said, with expanded governance authority. And I'd like to help design the next leadership structure. The chair nodded slowly. That aligns with the board's direction. The meeting moved on. Just like that. No confrontation. No final showdown. The end came quietly. That afternoon, I received a single text from my father. I understand your decision. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I replied, I hope someday you understand mine. We didn't speak after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that mattered had already been said through action. Over the next few months, my life settled into something new. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. I stayed with the company in a role that fit me. Strategy, oversight, long-term thinking. The things I'd always been good at when no one was watching. Ethan and I rebuilt something cautiously, without hierarchy, without pretending. My mother and I spoke occasionally, carefully, with boundaries that no longer needed explanation. As for my father, he retreated into privacy, consulting occasionally, attending fewer events, no longer the center of every room. I didn't feel victorious about that. I felt free. Looking back now, I understand the real turning point wasn't the court ruling, or the board vote, or even the trust reverting. It was the moment I stopped asking to be chosen. Because when love is conditional, it isn't love. It's control. And when you spend your life trying to earn a place in a system designed to keep you small, the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight harder inside it. It's to step back, draw a line, and choose yourself. If you've ever been excluded, managed, or quietly diminished by the people who were supposed to support you, I hope this story reminds you of something important. You don't need to be louder to be powerful. You don't need permission to set boundaries. And you don't need to inherit anything to claim your own worth. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, comment, or subscribe. I read every message. And if you've lived your own version of this, I want to hear it. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with dignity. And that's the kind of ending that lasts.